You guys probably thought I forgot about the little Yamaha Yz80 here, but we did not. It's back in action. So today we're going to be rebuilding this thing. We picked this up for $475 last video, and the guy that sold it to me said, oh yeah, the bottom end is fine. You know, it just needs a new piston and a honing on the cylinder. Got back home, the cylinder was scratched pretty deep, so I had to hone it for quite a while. It was bored over 2 millimeters. The crank was seized, the rod bearings were seized, and then the crank bearings were seized on the engine. So this thing needed a full rebuild. And then the crank rod ended up being discontinued, so I had to spend $400 to get the crank rebuilt, and it took about 2 weeks to do. So just finding parts for this thing was almost impossible. There's one rod left in the entire US, and the guy had to do the crank was able to find one and buy it. This is the rod. This is the old one, but that's what it looks like. That part's discontinued. Every other part for the crank build was discontinued. So yeah, that was super exciting. We also got the top end bearing for the rod as well. We've got that. And then we've got a brand new piston from Yz80. You can see it's 50 millimeter. This thing is bored over from 48 millimeter to 50 millimeter. And then we've got new crank seals, new crank bearings. You can see this one's locked up. It doesn't even move. This one moves a little bit, but it's pretty crunchy. And then the crank is in the freezer right now, so we can install that later today. But transmission was fine, super smooth. Everything else on the cases were good. Clutch was good. Everything else was perfect on this thing. So it's really just the crank bearings, and then the rod bearings, and then the rod and the crank. So we should have this thing rebuilt today, and we should be able to attempt the first ride on it. So without further ado, let's get going on this thing and try to hear this thing run today. All right, first things first, let's get the crank seals out and then the bearings pushed out of here. There we go. Crank seal out. Now we can punch that bearing out of there. Look at all the metal shavings behind there. Looks pretty good still. Here's the bearing. It's completely locked up. Doesn't even move. Alright, so that bearing's out of there. To get the new one in, we're going to heat up the surface right here. And then we've got the new bearings in the freezer. We're just going to try to drop them in. And then we can kind of pound them on with a socket that's the size of the outer diameter of the bearing. You don't want to go on the inner race, you want to go on the outer race. So, alright, second seal coming out. This one's in there pretty good too. That seals out. You can see some metal shavings in there. So that was like that. second bearing. Alright, so time to install the bearings. We've got our punch right here in case the bearings don't just slide right in. We're going to heat up the surface around here. And like I said before, we've got the bearing in the freezer. Just gonna heat this area up. Let's see if we can get the bearing in there now. Numbers facing up. Alright, that's the way to do it. See on the back side, no gap in there whatsoever, so we're perfect. Alright, one bearing down, one more to go. Alright, same thing with this one, just going to heat up the surrounding area of where the bearings need to go. See if that's good. Perfect. Alright, we got both bearings in. Alright, that slid right in. Alright, so that's in. Let's get the gasket maker around here and get the other side on. Alright, we've got gasket material both sides of the cases. Let's see if this thing can go together. Should slide right on, hopefully. Just double check everything, make sure everything's in there. Everything looks pretty good. Alright, this should pull the cases together. Make sure the crank spins freely. Looking good. Transmission. And we gotta get the seals in there. Feels good. Nice and smooth. Alright, time to get the stator in next, and then the flywheel. So, let's see, we've got the stator plate right here. Let's see, this is gonna go. Over here. So that line right there needs to line up with that line right there. That's how you know the timing's spot on there. I'll zoom in for you guys. So we're right on the money. We're gonna put some Loctite on the bolts right here. Alright, next we've got the woodruff key in, flywheel's going on. Washer. And we'll torque that down. Alright, working on the clutch side. Let's get the clutch basket on here. And then there's going to be a washer. Like that. Plates are a little stuck together. That's what the rod looks like. It's going to go in, push rod. And there's a little ball. Looks like that. That's going to go in there. We're going to shove that down there so we don't lose it. Gotta get the nut on there. So washer. Nut. And then the push rod goes on, and then the plate. So that's how that goes. Alright, so we're working on the water pump impeller next. As you guys know from last video on this thing, we found out that the water pump impeller gets shoved onto here, but this one just is pretty much like stripped out, so it doesn't move with the shaft. So what we're gonna do is take some of this part epoxy, it dries in like 5 minutes, mix that up, put a little bit on that, and then stick that on there. And that should prevent that from moving. Stick a little bit in there like that. I'll wipe the excess off here. Alright, we'll let that dry and we'll see if that works. Alright, we got the bottom end complete except for the cover on the water pump, which we want to make sure that the water pump spins with the shaft, so we're going to leave that off for now. But let's get the base gasket on next. Going to put a little gasket maker down, and we've got a gasket kit for it. Going to dab a little bit in. We rinsed this with hot soapy water about 5 times and then sprayed it with brake cleaner. I went through each and every crevice and stuck a rag down it, pulled it through, and there's not a single thing of honing material left on there. So it's super clean, all honed out, good to go. And I blew through it with the air compressor just to make sure, and it is perfect. So we are ready to see if the ring fits in there. Here's the new ring from the new piston. Just see the ring gap here. Ooh, it's gonna look pretty tight. Just kind of shove that down with the piston here. Alright, let's measure the ring gap. Looks, yep, 12 thousandths of an inch is what the size is for the ring. That's fine. We just don't want it too tight or too big, and you can see how small that is. Gap right there. So looking pretty good. All right, so that's done. So on these 2-stroke pistons, we're going to have to drill 2 holes in it right here, because there's actually a bridge right there and it gets hot. So Wiseco recommends you drill 2 holes right where the piston sits, right where that piston sits and hits that bridge right there, so that can be lubricated. So we're going to drill the 2 holes next. You can see the previous piston had the 2 holes drilled already. Alright, the 2 holes are drilled. You can see. We're just going to spray that off with some brake cleaner and then we'll install that next. Alright, we've got the roller bearing for the top here. Put that in. We've got the piston all lubed up. Pin is all lubed up. Arrow faces towards the exhaust side. Alright, pistons installed. Just have to get the other clip in there. Alright, let's get the cylinder on. Alright, head is cleaned up. Let's get this on. Alright, next we gotta get the reeds on. Got a gasket for that as well. Right here are the reeds. They look really good. Alright, head bolts need to be torqued to 25 foot-pounds. Crisscross pattern here. Getting tighten up first here. I might do this on the machine, it might be a little bit easier. Alright, let's get this thing installed in the frame. Alright, so we got the engine in, everything is back together, looking pretty good. Pipe is on, tank is on, seats on, plastics are on. Unfortunately, we're missing the plastic for the air box right there. I thought I had it at one point, but I guess I don't. But we're still waiting on the impeller to dry here. Just gonna wait until that dries a little bit more before we attempt to start this thing up. Plus I'm waiting for the gasket maker to dry between the cases so it doesn't leak. And then we'll get some coolant in this thing, we'll get some premix 40 to 1, and we'll attempt to start this thing up for the first time. Hopefully she runs and everything goes smoothly. Alright, impeller is finally dry on there. It's the next day. Let's get some oil added to this thing. It's a little sticky. This thing takes 650 milliliters, you can see it right there. Make sure our drain plug is in. No leaking yet, it's good. Alright, let's see if it holds coolant here. Alright, moment of truth. Let's get some 40 to 1 premix in there and attempt to start it. Right, we've got good spark. Alright, it runs pretty good. It runs really good. I'm not sure if the impeller is working though. We'll have to check and make sure that's working. Looks like the pump's working. Alright, this thing is all set to go. Let's go test drive it. Alright, just made it out here. A little windy today. There she sits. Let's get her unloaded here. That thing rips. Really fast little bike. That thing's crazy. Tons of power on it. That'll lift up easily in second gear. Alright, so I didn't really know what to expect with this bike, but it rips pretty good. I did not expect it to have as much power as it did. Thing's pretty fun. I'm just gonna check and see if that water pump is still working. I'll take the cap off right here, start it up, and we'll see if it's pouring out at the top of the tube right here. If it is, that means it's working. Yeah, it's working. Alright, so water pump is still working, that's a good sign. So the epoxy's holding up pretty good. Alright, without further ado, let's take this thing for a little rip. See how she does. The front sprocket's kind of worn down, so that's the only issue with it right now. I gotta get a new sprocket for it. Once it's warm, it starts first kick. So smoking out the back. Yep. Clutch is working too. Tires are bald too. Sounds good, doesn't it? She's a little ripper. Sounds so good. Yeah, she's sounding pretty good. That's crazy. Obviously the silencer is not really working too great, but yeah, she's ripping good. Man, she runs really good right now. Alright, just got back from the first ride on this thing, and went really well. Thing has tons of power, starts right up, and is super fast for an 80cc. Very quick bike. Brakes all worked. We didn't have any leaking out of the engine or the carburetor, so that was good. And then the water pump held up, still pumping. And I checked the oil, and it's not milky, so we know that the water pump seal is good as well. So really we just need the side cover for it right here, for the air filter, and then a new sprocket and chain, and this thing should be complete. Hope you guys enjoyed the rebuild on this thing. It was pretty fun to do, and this is such a cool bike, so I'm happy I got to dig into it and fix it up. It's running great now. So anyway guys, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing. Stay tuned for next one. Until next time, we are out.